country's legal system
Pull!
is fucking fucked. Here you go.
Oh, no, you need to practice a lot more than I do.
All right, then.
You can't blame someone for taking the law in their own hands. You know, there's a thing I really believe in.
What's that?
Hey, it's personal justice. Right. For when our pussified justice system fails, when we do this, we do it right.
Right.
Personal justice, it's gonna be yours. You didn't take all that unfairness laying down.
Hell no, I didn't.
Oh!
Now that's the America I miss, right there.
Amen, amen.
Uh-huh.
Look, there are three things you need to kill, man.
Yes.
The gun,
Right.
the bullets, and the balls, and boy, I'm stockpiling all three of those things.
Oh, Mr. Tanner. Pull! That's what I'm talking about right there.
There's an expectation that romantic comedies are, you know, driven by formula, and there's sort of a superficiality to them. And there's also kind of, I think, still a stigma that they're for women. And Hitman really worked for me for the most part because there's a lot more going on under the surface. I think the humor is a lot wittier and darker than a typical romantic comedy. The actual romance in the movie had a lot of chemistry, and I think there's sort of a surprising amount of frankness towards sex in the movie than a typical like PG-13 theatrical romantic comedy. And also, I think this film has, you know, something interesting to say about the nature of self and how we sort of change ourselves to fit other people's expectations, that type of thing. But I think the limits of the genre also sort of occasionally reveal themselves. There's some moments that really stretch credulity in the film. The ending is a little too convenient. And I don't know, with a romantic comedy, it's always, or a romance movie in general, it's always, will they or won't they? Will they get together? Won't they get together? And those are sort of the only two options as far as how you can end it. There's not a lot to, there's a lot of wiggle room there as far as where you can go with something like that. Welcome to Theater and Stream, a film podcast. I am Matt, that is Chuck, and this is episode 45. Today we're looking at the latest from the directorial chameleon, Richard Linklater. The director of the Before trilogy, he's back in the romance genre, and with him, he's bringing America's sort of up-and-coming sweetheart, Glen Powell. We'll be talking about his latest film a little bit later, but we've also got the Watchlist. It's a little bit horror-centric this week. We've got one news story that is really like taking the film world by storm, and then we'll end the show with the Mentionables as we always do. Please do throw us a like, throw us a subscribe if you like what we're doing here at the channel. But otherwise, unless you've got anything else to say, Chuck, we can get right into it.
I think the thing that surprised me the most, I guess, about Mr. Glen Powell, I didn't know he was multidimensional and multifaceted himself. He has a screenwriting credit on Hitman,
Yeah.
And we'll probably dig into that a little bit, further as we head into it. But yeah, first we have to kind of look into the topic of the moment. Everyone's fucking talking about this, expounding on it, grifting in their own particular way. But we have some box office hysteria kind of going on within the industry and in the press, as it were, both professional and, citizen around film in the industry. But things are looking kind of dire for this box office. And I guess at the front, is this markedly worse than the COVID era, or what is this relative to within our recent box office history? Because it felt like the industry was just on its last legs coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
But then Barbie Oppenheimer's success made them feel like they had more going on. There was hope, but there is no light in 2024. And why might that be?
Yeah, well, I mean, this COVID was definitely worse. I think by this time, especially in that first year in 2020, the theaters were still actually closed at this time. But this is still, I guess, pretty bad because what's happening here is basically the Film Journalist Collective have been publishing these articles all over the internet that are already sort of announcing the summer 2024 box office is a lost cause, essentially, after the month of May. And they cite the awful performance of three movies: The Fall Guy, Furiosa, and then to a little bit of a lesser extent, If, the from the mind of John Krasinski.
Because it was so expensive. Like, that was a
Yeah.
big family movie. Like, it should have gone bonkers at the box office, but it didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then on top of that, Memorial Day weekend, which historically is one of the biggest weekends for the box office, was like the worst in 29 years. And then the entire month of May was the worst May since 26 years. And so all of this kind of naturally snowballed into, bigger things like the death of theaters. And so we're hearing about that now, the most since the middle of the pandemic. And so, yeah, that's kind of what's going on. And my big question kind of for us was, is this being blown out of proportion? Are they correct? And I guess to, get my thoughts out there, I think, movie theaters have been dying a slow death ever since the pandemic. And I don't think that this has necessarily accelerated it in any way. I think that the performance of May 2024 can literally be traced to the selection, like of the movies that were released, because I think that a lot of these film journos need to learn to separate their tastes from the tastes of the general public. And when I look at these three movies, If, Furiosa, and The Fall Guy, I don't think that these were movies that excited the general public, and they never were gonna be those movies. And it's just these are the types of movies that make people say, nah, I think I'll wait for streaming. I don't need to go see that in a theater. And so there is no Barbie, there is no Oppenheimer, there was none of that in May. And I think we're going to get that eventually this summer with Deadpool and Wolverine and Inside Out 2. But I don't know. It's a little bit, I think there's a little bit too much hubbub being made about this because we still have, 3 months to go in the summer box office.
This factoid blew my mind. Mm-hmm. The Challengers is like somehow still relevant to the box office take during blockbuster season. And yeah, so like there's lots of like flashing lights going on. And as to why, because like and I think I just want to key in on If a little bit here. Because like as the preeminent family movie, it's got lots of CG, it's like mixed media basically. Because like typically those kinds of things tend to draw in the families. But if you have a family of 4, like I do, for example, not that I would take Luca to a theater right now, because he's, so, considerate and quiet. But it costs upwards of like $80 to $100, depending on where you live. Like ticket prices at my local AMC hover between 10 to 15, depending what we're talking about. But when you factor in snacks, it's just, it blows up your budget. And no wonder everyone is staying at home, just given the economic, conditions of the country and just how prevalent those conditions, are with, like, especially, at movie theaters. You're already spending probably that amount of money a month on streaming. So why wouldn't you just wait for it? Like, that honestly, like, that's why I haven't seen the new Planet of the Apes movie yet. I just didn't think it would be worth the fuss it would take to get me there. You know, it was hard enough just to be able to see Furiosa, 2 weeks ago. But I was able to pull it off. But I'm not going to do that for something that to me kind of seems like streaming fodder anyway. And like people slag Netflix for like the streaming movie aesthetic, like where they don't look like movies to people. But honestly, I think that's hitting even movies that are supposed to be in theaters. They are tailoring their content for the streaming experience in some subtle way, and it just like they're not doing enough, content wise. And yeah, Marvel has scaled back their releases considerably, and that usually brought people out, and it at least got them if like their butt in a seat to see a trailer, to see, oh well, that might be fun to go see in a theater too later on, for other movies. And the opportunity to sell the experience just isn't there, because like I feel like a lot of that happens in the theater itself.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's like the If especially. I mean, If looks like to me, if I would have ever known that it was a theatrical movie, I would have just assumed it was a Netflix movie, because it just has that like that sort of cheap aesthetic, that CG that isn't quite up to par. And yeah, I mean, there's no FOMO associated with these movies
Exactly.
either. Like Barbie and Oppenheimer, there was a certain amount of like, I need to see this in theaters because all my friends are seeing it and they're all posting about it on TikTok or Instagram. And there is none of that with any of the movies that were released in May. But even so, I think people need to kind of get their head out of their ass when they think that, a movie like Barbie or Oppenheimer, if you would have taken those movies and just transposed them to this year, one or two films can't save an entire industry. So, it's like these movies, these one or two, gigantic blockbusters every summer are not going to be the savior of the film industry. And so they need to, theaters need to learn to pivot, or they're going to have to learn to pivot. And I think that's, gonna unfortunately entail a lot of them closing. And we don't need 20 different regional or national theater chains anymore, and, towns that are under 10,000 people, arguably don't even need a theater anymore. And towns, that are over, 100,000 people don't need 3 or 4 chains. Everything needs to scale back, and that's kind of what's going to happen, I think, going forward. Is theaters are going to become basically equivalent to a novelty. They're going to become equivalent to your town having an arcade or a barcade, or your town having a like go-karts, or like a laser tag center or something like that, where it's like, we can afford to go and do this once every 3 months or 6 months as a family, or as on a date or something like that.
I'm still muted. I had a hardware malfunction over here. But then that's pretty accurate. Like I feel like if movie theaters are going to survive in any capacity, it's going to be like, and this is what if I had millions of dollars, what I would do, I would just have my own New Beverly in Minot. And I would just screen whatever the fuck I wanted to, just because I could. Or at least I wish people would do that, because you got to, like, because Angie in November got to go to her first movie ever a couple weeks ago. And it's a credit to, and you'll laugh at what the movie was, because it wasn't anything new, because like she doesn't care. She's not invested in like that kind of thing. She just knows that Disney is a thing on the TV. That's what it is to her. But The Mummy from 1999 with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz and all that, all of our old friends from 1999, re-released. So they went down to Bismarck and they saw it. And she loved it. Because like that theater, as you know yourself, has like an Egyptian aesthetic and theme to it already. So she just thinks that this is where you watch The Mummy all the time, And she's been asking to go back and see The Mummy there again. And unfortunately, that's not an option. But if you had a more boutique setup, you could do that. You could be like, oh yeah, we're gonna have Mummy Month, or we're gonna be doing a programmed, screenings of a bunch of Francis Ford Coppola's movies in anticipation of Megalopolis. And these chains kind of do that. They do those throwback things, but I think they need to lean a little more heavily into that. Especially since what we're getting as a product is so uninspired, from new releases. I don't know. The back catalog is what's important. The history of cinema, I think, is what they need to dig back into. Remind people what the magic was. Of course, we're just seeing these digital versions of it. I remember seeing Alien at one of those, and I wasn't that impressed by how it looked. I have to couch it a little bit. Like they'd have to commit to, giving a proper theatrical experience of the movie versus this is the video file that 20th Century Fox sent us, or whatever. Even give me some film, show me some actual film, projection, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they definitely need to mine back into their back catalog a lot better. And there's actually a place. It's funny you bring up sort of this idea of like a micro cinema, because there is a place around me here in the Minneapolis area called the Trilon Cinema, and it's kind of exactly what you're talking about, where it's this little tiny privately owned one-screen theater, and the guy who owns it basically only screens older films, and he specifically sort of tailors the experience towards like film snobs, basically, because he gets the 35 millimeter prints in, he gets the he doesn't do digital. He gets the prints in. He tailors it to the pretentious film snobs, and so that's exactly what you need to do. You need to sell people on stuff like that. And let me make a prediction right here and now that this weekend is the weekend of that Lord of the Rings re-release that we sort of touched on.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be, I think the Fellowship was last night, Friday the 7th of June, and now they're going to show the other two over Saturday and Sunday. And so my prediction is going to be that these three movies are going to do better box office than most of the new movies that get released this month.
Well, and on that list that we have here, I'll blow it up so people can see it better. But if you'll look, I know it's towards the bottom. It didn't beat Tarot, but Phantom Menace is still making money. That movie is still doing well, and that's for a reason. It's part of it is nostalgia, but it's also it's a Star Wars movie, and Disney is utterly uninterested in actually making new Star Wars content for theaters. We just have shit like The Acolyte, which we will not waste a breath discussing further because the grifters are doing that for us. We all know why we shouldn't, be giving it our eyeballs, but people want to give their eyeballs to things they actually care about, and a lot of what we have on offer isn't that. But if there was a movie that was going to turn the box office around after the summer, because Wolverine and Deadpool might do well, who knows? But further down the line, what could change the conversation to being more positive, do you think?
Well, I do think that it probably will be initially Inside Out 2, which comes out in a couple weeks. And then I do think Deadpool and Wolverine is going to do pretty well. And then also, you've got the new Despicable Me movie.
Yes.
Despicable Me 4, which will do well. And then, once we get past August, gosh, I mean, I think Alien will do decent. The new Alien movie.
That trailer is intriguing.
Yeah.
I like. Is it Fede Alvarez or Fade?
Fede Alvarez.
Fede. Okay, I've heard it both ways. I like that dude, and I trust that dude. I'm glad that he has saved that franchise from Ridley Scott, or at least been given the opportunity to do so, because much like when James Cameron came on board, giving a fresh approach, to that franchise is what it needs right now. Now we're back. The Savage Beast has been soothed, and now it is time for the watch list, which, as you mentioned, is a little on the horror side this week. So what do we got going on first?
Yeah, so speaking of box office smashes, Exhuma is currently the number one movie of 2024 in South Korea and has sort of proven to be a juggernaut in that country. I always try and kind of look at these movies that are performing well, especially in like the Asian countries, because their tastes tend to really diverge from us here in the US. But and more they're sort of producing their own number one films at the box office. And this year it happens to be Exhuma, which is a new horror film. Well, let me ask you this. First off, Chuck, do you know what geomancy is?
No, I don't.
Okay. So, geomancy is basically feng shui, but for like the land and for like topography instead of like your house. And so when somebody dies in South Korea and they have sort of the money and also the belief, the sort of religious belief structure, they hire a geomancer to basically pick the plot for their grave site. Because there's this sort of idea that you can have a bad grave site and you can have a good grave site, and that will affect many things. Failure to pick a good grave site may result in a restless spirit, which will result in your ancestors, or I mean your progeny being haunted by your ancestors, basically.
Oh my god!
And so,
okay.
That's kind of where this movie begins. There are these two shamans that are hired to help a rich Korean family that lives in the U.S. because they think they're basically being haunted by their ancestors. And the two shamans find out that the family patriarch is buried back in Korea. And so they enlist the help of a geomancer who is played by everybody's favorite Korean actor, Choi Min-sik from tons of stuff, but I Saw the Devil, I guess, would be probably the most notable thing.
And Old Boy is another one that, like, I guess primarily I associate him with too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Old Boy. He's been in so many Korean films. He's sort of like, I guess, Korea's grandpa in some way, but yeah. So he plays the geomancer in this movie, and basically what he goes and finds the grave site of this patriarch for this Korean family, and there is some bad juju going on there, and there's all this weird stuff about it. Like it's just a lone grave on the top of this like mountain, and the grave marker is really like weirdly plain, and there's all this weird writing over it. And so what they decide to do is to exhume the body, and they're going to move it to a better place. But once they start digging, they find some fucked up shit. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it as far as the plot goes, because this is kind of one of those movies that has the twists and turns, and the further they keep digging, the more stuff they find, and it's pretty messed up. And I don't know, one of the coolest things to me about foreign horror is that, you know, their idea of their things like ghosts and demons and zombies and monsters look completely different than what we have as Americans, what we conjure in our minds and our folklore and our entertainment. And so there are just like these visions of demons in this movie and like ghosts that are just so like, it just penetrate my mind because it looks so different than all of the, you know, regurgitated stuff we get here in the US. And I love this movie. This is another unmitigated banger from South Korea, and it's so scary, and there's really good twists, and it's just incredible. And there's a reason why this is the number one movie there right now, because it just scared the shit out of so many people. And I don't do this very often because I don't want to sound like too preachy or too like I don't want my recommendations to get too numerous, but oh, I think I froze again.
You did, but let's just
Shit.
power through and then we can restart.
Okay. So yeah, basically I just wanted to say, that Chuck, you have to see this movie. You must see this movie.
I will find a way. Where is it available? Just on video on demand?
Well, yeah, currently you can rent it for about $6, but I'm sure that there are many sources. I mean, this being the number one movie in Korea, I'm sure there are many places you can find it if you don't want to pony up the $6. But I totally think you should. It's totally worth it.
No, I hadn't heard about it until you put it to the document, and as soon as I figured out what it was about, I was in 100%. Because I agree with you. There is just something tired and uninspired about the things that Hollywood thinks scare us. Like we're going back to, like, a lot of people, as we're going to discuss later in the watch list here, will just go back to what worked 50 years ago, 60 years ago. What scared us then? And we were a very different people at that time. We have such a, as I don't know, like the classics of American horror, outside of slasher movies, is often tailored to the Judeo-Christian aesthetic and their sensibilities, and they aren't very creative when it comes to exploring that. Like when I'm seeding where we're gonna go later, and and of course it is always more interesting and often like more fertile ground for our minds because we get such limited exploration, to look to foreign lands, to look to foreign markets. Now I'm gonna kind of talk about something I watched on Hulu, from FX, that being the series that I don't think anyone was clamoring for, but is interesting to me as a kind of companion piece to Winning Time, I suppose, because all of these people, were relevant, to that, from that era. But this covers the downfall of the owner of the Clippers. What was his fucking? Yeah, Donald Sterling was his name. And I remember like following this, just through like ESPN or like Deadspin articles at the time. I wasn't too invested, but the gist of it is he had like this sugar baby, assistant, and he is kind of going senile. He's an old white man. So she would like record their conversations so that he could be consistent, so he'd be able to remember what he said or keep track of, what other people told him, that kind of thing. And she, for one reason or another, this illuminates maybe why, but like she released it to TMZ, and was basically looking for her nut. And what this show kind of explores more fully is just how fucking weird he was, how awful of an owner of a professional sports franchise he was. And if there's someone to really shout out, it's Lawrence Fishburne as Doc Rivers, the coach, because he's kind of a scumbag in his own right, and he has this weird coaching style where he's just a savage cunt to his players. He's toxic and horrible, and makes it very hard to want to win for him in anything. And the basketball players kind of take a back seat. Yeah, there's someone playing JJ Redick and someone playing Chris Paul, but they aren't what's important. What's important is is it like Cleopatra Coleman, I think is her name. She's playing the assistant. I'm blanking on everyone else's names. You froze again. I noticed.
Yeah, I froze again.
I think Matt just might have to be stationary. Where I'm not sure what the issue is. I blame my internet more than anything. What's her name? Jackie Weaver plays Shelley Sterling. The slighted wife and everything. And it does a decent enough job of being entertaining, and while at the same time, like reliving recent history. Like this is like maybe 10 years old, as far as a scandal goes. And I guess like one last comment that I'll make is that the novelty of it being such recent history is that you have some people playing themselves. Like there's this recurring thing in the first couple episodes where Doc Rivers is at like the spa of like whatever gym he goes to, and LeVar Burton comes in and just like talks to him about shit. And like he had such hope, Doc Rivers, of like of overcoming the Clippers curse because it just destroyed so many people associated with it, and it just never was going anywhere. And he was like, I'm gonna overcome this, like this shitty owner, it's not gonna hold me back. I'm the guy who got the Celtics another title, yada yada yada. And the first major basketball centric moment is this very relevant series with the young Golden State Warriors the year before they won their first title. And the Clippers won. It started this bitter rivalry and a beef with Chris Paul between all of those players. So it is funny seeing some guy doing his best impression of God, what's his name? The dude who's always kicking people in the nuts. Is it Green? Yeah, I think
is Blake Griffin in this?
Yes, he is. And but the guy they have playing him is so unconvincing. The guy playing Chris Paul is just not right. The guy playing JJ Redick is perfect, as far as recreating the guy. But yeah, Blake Griffin is in it. And there's this hilarious moment at the white party where Sterling is like holding his hand and leading him around and showing him off to all the old white women so they could be like all grossly sexual with him. Like he's just a piece of meat. So yeah, because like there's another one of Donald Sterling's white parties are relevant, because if you watched Winning Time, you saw Magic Johnson's experience with one of these things. But yeah, it's interesting. If you kind of want a continuation of the Winning Time universe, or just like of the of these like of the NBA television, this is a good thing to check out.
Sure.
But now we gotta kind of circle back around to horror with the First Omen, which ill-conceived. Have you ever seen the originals? Like that original trilogy that began with Gregory Peck and ended with Sam Neill as Damien? Yeah. Okay. So looking back on it, did it scare you?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I would say they did. I mean, I do remember specific images from especially the first one, there's a reason why in this movie they do like a play on the hanging scene, when the woman kills herself.
And then they go further. They go a step further. They had to do something more.
Yeah, she lights herself on fire. And then also like the stuff like the dog, like the weird like black dog that shows up in the first one. There's stuff like that definitely, still kind of occupy a space in my mind. So I would say they used to be a lot more scarier than what I think of as of them now.
Yeah. And I guess that's my beef. Like outside of one moment in the First Omen, which basically tells the story of how Damien was actually conceived and implanted with the ambassador's family. There was only one moment that really made me like jump or like, cringe away from what I was seeing. And it was that like birth sequence that, yes, is very clinical, but then ends with like a demon arm poking out of a woman's gaping vagina. Like that was not something I expected to see. But other than that, it's just so conventional, I thought. And it didn't give me anything, like, I don't know. It just seemed so basic to just go back to the tropes of a 60s horror movie and then just speckle it, with like more edgy or extreme versions of things we've already seen. Like the weird, like satanic Rube Goldberg machine assassinations that happen.
Yeah.
Like right away in the beginning. Like I had to rewatch it because I was like, wait, what happened? What hit him? Like
Yeah, this is a surprisingly dull movie where there really isn't much in by way of like jump scares or even like just like moments that actually like get you to jump or get you to kind of be terrified. It's very you use the word clinical but in a different sense, but I'll say
yeah,
this is a very clinical movie in that it's just kind of like by the numbers and just kind of not very scary, just kind of dull. And I think the director the times in this movie when I was most interested in it was when the director was doing really interesting things with like the shots. And I almost think her name's Arkasha Stevenson, and I almost think she would be like a better DP than a director because there's like that shot of Margaret when her head is on the pillow after her night of drinking and her hair is all like splayed out, and I'm like, oh man, that's a really good shot. And there's just like certain moments in this movie that I'm like, wow, this is actually like really well photographed, but it's still pretty dull. And there's like the moment of the when they show like the demon dick in when they do like the rape scene, the demon rape scene, and you just see the demon's dick and it looks like this giant like tendril thing, and I'm like, okay, this is sort of interesting, what's happening here, the how the shots are composed and just the stuff she's getting in the frame. But yeah, otherwise just very, very dull in my opinion.
and I even kind of took issue with their addition to the Omen lore, if you can call it that. But the I just am not convinced by the notion that the people who bring about the Antichrist are doing it just because not enough teenagers are going to church in the 60s. like you're gonna kickstart the fucking you're gonna embanitize the eschaton because you don't have enough butts in your pews. Like are you kidding me? You're gonna end the world for this? Like it just seemed kind of dopey. Like
drastic.
It made I guess I'm not entirely sure how. Like it was just kind of established that they were satanic cultists in like the vague sense, and in the originals, at least anyway, like the conspiracy to bring about the Moonchild, and I don't know. I think that like actually having a more of a like a Crowley-esque character, would have worked a little bit better. I'm a little bit like more into that genuine sort of occultism, in these kinds of stories. And and I'm not just whinging because I'm returned to being a practicing Catholic, because I just don't think it makes sense that the Catholic Church would actually want to end the world. They want this grift to continue forever,
Mm-hmm. Anything that like tries to connect this movie to the old ones is just awful. Like, we already brought up the hanging scene, but then the scene at the very, very end, it's like it's so stupid. It's literally like Studio Notes the scene where she's in that like cabin, and then they do the thing where, she's like, or he what's his name? Ralph Ineson comes to the cabin and he's like, the other one is a boy and he survived. Oh, what's his name? Damien.
Yeah.
Credits. Oh god, that was just like that was Studio Notes the scene. That was like literally we need a sequel to this movie, the scene, and it was awful.
Well, it begs the question: why is the male the evil one? Why is the girl that she is raising so good and pure? And maybe they could answer that in the sequel. Maybe she's the antithesis.
You're spoiling the twist for the second Omen now, Chuck. Where that is the twist of the sequel to this movie, is that the girl ends up being the demonic one. So I'm sure that's exactly what they would do.
Then there would actually be a moral quandary. It's like, does she kill her like the spawn that looks like her now. But like my hot take is this: like a lot of people, like this movie has a lot of fans that make a lot of sense to me. Like the Midnight Mass guy.
Oh, yeah, God, I'm blanking on his name also, but yes, I know who you're talking
Yeah,
about. He did the prequel, Doctor Sleep, and
yeah,
Flanagan.
Flanagan. Yeah, Flanagan loves this. He's like, people are gonna, people are missing out on a classic. It will become a cult favorite on streaming. Like that's just how this works. It doesn't matter that it failed, but there was a better movie in this genre, a better, like the same exact story, essentially starring Sydney Sweeney, that I caught like when I was looking for random crap to watch one time, and that was better. It even had a, like, and if you're gonna current day it did a better job of being relevant to making a political point, because instead of saving like the child or like sparing it, that spoiler alert, at the end of Immaculate, Sydney Sweeney sees she's given birth to like a demon baby and just fucking kills it with a rock. It's awesome. Like it's badass. And it gets the body horror of it a little bit better, and it is even somewhat more authentic as to what religious life is like, even if you are brought into it solely for the purpose of birthing, the first coming of Satan onto the earth or whatever. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I recommend Immaculate a lot more. And I know that it's just a meme that like white movie fans, for some males especially, prefer Sydney Sweeney to anyone in Hollywood. You don't even see like her naked in it. It's a better movie. It understands what it is a lot better. It's not pretentious, and it had a much more satisfying ending, at the close of it, I would say.
Yeah, I gotta check that one out. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is sort of one of the narratives entwined with these two films, because they came out around the same time, is kind of like, which one is better, The First Omen or Immaculate? And so, yeah, that is one I definitely need to see still.
I want a sequel to Immaculate. I want to see, like, not that I can't conceive of what it would be. Does she just like, oh, the cult is still out there, I need to find some way to stop them from doing it again, and she's just like this bounty hunting vigilante, killing off cults around the world. That would be pretty awesome. But yeah, it is what it is. And in this case, The Last Omen, it's not as bad as the Exorcist Believer, but by God, it suffers for a lot of the same reasons. Now it's time to move towards our main event, which I'm really looking forward to, because this is not a movie I thought I would have as much to say about, but why don't you get it started for us?
Yeah, so, well, I guess before I launch into my intro, I just want to confirm, is this like the first romantic comedy we've ever done?
As a featured review, yeah. We've done
Yeah? Okay.
we've done plenty of like romantic dramas, like if you go deep enough. And yeah, like but even this is unconventional to call it a rom-com, even though it certainly is.
Yeah, it's many things. And yeah, so for my intro, I wanted to get that out of the way, because I don't think we typically bother with the subgenre, because there's an expectation that romantic comedies are, driven by formula, and there's sort of a superficiality to them. And there's also kind of, I think, still a stigma that they're for women. And Hitman really worked for me for the most part, because there's a lot more going on under the surface. I think the humor is a lot wittier and darker than a typical romantic comedy. The actual romance in the movie had a lot of chemistry, and I think there's sort of a surprising amount of frankness towards sex in the movie than a typical like PG-13 theatrical romantic comedy. And also, I think this film has, something interesting to say about the nature of self and how we sort of change ourselves to fit other people's expectations, that type of thing. But I think the limits of the genre also sort of occasionally reveal themselves. there's some moments that really stretch credulity in the film. The ending is a little too convenient. And I don't know, there's with a romantic comedy, it's always or a romance movie in general, it's always will they or won't they? Will they get together? Won't they get together? And those are sort of the only two options as far as how you can end it. There's not a lot to there's a lot of wiggle room there as far as where you can go with something like that. And so, of course, that is kind of how this movie ends too. It's sort of a will they get together, won't they get together, will they stay together, won't they? And it is one of those two things. I'll just spoil it now. And so, yeah, really, really liked it a lot overall, a lot better than I was expecting. And yeah, that's where I'll kind of leave it for now. What about you, Chuck? What did you think?
Like as I was watching it and getting caught up in it, what I came to realize was that this was tickling the same pleasure area that Dexter always did when it was at its best, which is where you're inside the head of a character who is constantly trying to eventually, like, this is about his journey to becoming a character like Dexter, like the hitman that Glenn Powell is playing, where initially he's this nebbish loser who no one really appreciates or likes having around. He's not really taking risks. He's just feeding his birds and taking care of his cats who have really dumb names. Like, you would not believe that this guy was capable of doing everything he eventually becomes capable of doing. And eventually you become so caught up and so enamored with him that you root for him to do bad things for the right reasons. Or at least the reasons that make sense for his journey as a character. He's, more than a bit of an anti-hero by the end. And there's even one character, the character Jasper in specific, is also literally lifted in my mind from the archetype of Dokes from the first season of Dexter, who's the foil, and and eventually compromises themselves so till the point that they create their own undoing. But the character played by Adria Arona, his love interest, is also very interesting, and I kept on being uncertain of how much was he being played by her. Because she also was very willing to do anything she needed to do and manipulate him to kind of do what he needed to do to be the person that she thought he was, or at least initially met and needed him to be. In that final scene especially, everything kind of crystallizes. And I kind of agree with you about how the inevitable conclusion to the rom-com kind of the ending wasn't as inspired as the rest of the movie was. And you just they go through the motions, the movie ends, they repeat the same lines they said to each other as when they first met, and then we get the credits. But I still think overall this is one of the movies from this year that I've enjoyed the most. I was very happy with what Richard Linklater was able to do. And yeah, it's right up there with the Bernie, that movie with Jack Black that he did.
I think, a good place to sort of start our review in earnest is, with Glenn Powell, because he is, the star and the one of three, I think, credited screenwriters. And so, I don't know, what did you think of him? As far as his casting and the way that he literally got to write the character himself. And so, do we believe him as this schlubby guy, this guy who wears jean shorts and, pushes his glasses up on the bridge of his nose? I don't know. What did you think about that?
Yeah, that wasn't very convincing. As soon as he becomes Ron, it's okay, yeah, this is the real Glenn Powell. And in the doc, you did pose the question, of whether a less conventionally attractive person would have been better suited. And that may have been. Yeah, because what about him was so off-putting that his coworkers wouldn't want to bang him? But then he flips his bit and is a guy for a little period, and they're both just I would take out my IUD for that man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know why he, within the confines of the plot of the movie, why he chose to live as he did. Because when you can, and this sort of is playing with a lot of the themes of the movie around self. And I mean, every time it's one of those like classroom scenes, we just get like an info dump of like themes and messaging, like the stuff that this movie is trying to sort of get across. And it's like, why would you choose to be this sort of, yeah, nebbish, nerdy guy when you clearly have the capability to portray yourself as someone like Ron and the looks to portray yourself as someone like Ron? And that sort of goes into the themes of the movie about how we change ourselves, you know, based on people's expectations, or you know, maybe we even change ourselves based on who we're around, because he changes his look, the hitman that he is portraying, he changes based on the person he is going to encounter in the field. And so yeah, there's, it's kind of interesting in that way, in how he sort of chose. I kind of wish the movie would have answered some of those questions, where, you know, why does he choose to portray himself as the nerdy guy when he can clearly be the not nerdy guy, you know?
Yeah, because like, apart from that one scene with his ex-wife, we don't get any, you know, like history on him, you know, and who he is as a person. And that was a little frustrating, but like everything else about the movie was just so endearing and compelling that I went along with it in stretches. But yeah, like that question kept on rearing its head, especially when they had his students revert from like mocking him to being like, "Whoa, when did he become hot?"
Mm-hmm. Looks like I froze again, but let's try and power through it. I'll do
Yeah.
audio only here, but yeah, I mean, it's like all of that stuff though is really interesting. I mean, I love those little vignettes where he played the different hitmen, and you know, some of them are clearly inspired by famous, you know, hitman like Anton Chigurh, or I guess not even hitmen, but just killers. Like there's that one character he played that it was obviously Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. And so I loved all those little vignettes that were sort of peppered throughout the movie of him, you know, meeting up with those people and then getting arrested and getting their photograph taken, and all that stuff was really, really good.
Like what were some, like, I guess, like lines or points of humor that you felt worked really well?
Oh yeah. The humor I thought was really, really good in the film, and I really like the line about when he meets up with her ex-husband, and I think it's Retta says something like he's gonna be the guy alone reading Catcher in the Rye, which is always a good sign.
Yep.
Something like that. That was good. What about you?
That one, and even like, God, like the exchange with you know, like one of the scenes like with Jasper, like his introduction, where he's like upset about being sidelined. He's like, "Is this cancel culture?" You know, it's like more people, it's 2-1 people agreeing with me, but in the context is he's like beating up black kids or something like that, if I recall correctly. And I just really liked that actor. What was his name?
I don't remember his name, but he got his big break from being in Linklater's last film, Everybody Wants Some, with Glenn Powell. Glenn Powell was also Glenn Powell's sort of big break before Top Gun, of course. But yeah, they were both in that film.
I barely remember that movie. I really do barely remember it, but Linklater likes going back and like doing like, cause yeah, like that was his update on Dazed and Confused. This kind of feels like his update on Bernie, but instead of like bleeding reality and fiction like Bernie does, this one takes a true story about a guy who really did this, but then creates this heightened plot line where he totally just morphs who he is and becomes a murderer himself. And I found that interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to touch on that because that is the whole ending of this film is where I just completely like jumped off the train because I was like, okay, I'm not on board with this anymore because okay, they essentially actually murder a guy at the end, and it's very like clinical. Like he just like walks over, grabs like a plastic shopping bag, and just puts it over his head. And within, I feel a lot of times like I talk about morality on this show, on our podcast, about how I can't jive with the morality of certain characters, but in this instance, I can't jive with the morality within the confines of this film because I could totally get on board with, horrible characters when it's set up in the movie that they're horrible and the movie isn't asking us to like relate to them and isn't asking us to love them. But this movie is totally asking us to love these characters, to be endeared to these characters. But then out of nowhere, it's just like, okay, they are literally going to murder a guy and then cut to next scene, happily ever after. They've got the kids. They've got the white picket fence house.
They've got the life insurance policy for the ex-husband that she murdered. You know, like,
so it's crazy that the movie is just suddenly like wants you to be fine with the what they do at the end of this movie, and it's just it was a little too convenient, and I don't know, I totally did not jive with the ending, and the kids are around the dinner table, and the one is they do the iron claw thing where the one kid is like, Daddy, how did you and Mommy meet? And I'm just like,
and they're like, oh, how do we tell this story to our child? Because that's a real thing that kids ask. Like November has asked us that question recently, and then of course we have to be like, well, we bet on the internet, like we have to, like, we can't like make it more interesting. Like my parents met at the UND dining center because my dad was like worked in it and was like giving people food, and she just thought he was cute, and then asked a girl who went to high school with him, about him, and she was like, "Oh, him? He doesn't date." Because he didn't date, and at that time that could have different meanings. But of course, my father obviously was not homosexual. But that was, when I hear that story, that's the implication I get. And you do have to be careful about that. And of course, their way of being careful is to like tell the truth, but obscure the reality of it. I guess it's all about pie. It's all about his famous apple pie. And that Mandy's character is like, and that's the thing that I like, that like keeps me at least a little invested, because I think that she is more like I think she's kind of an evil character, and what she, and we're just trusting that she was a reliable narrator about what was wrong in her marriage and why she wanted out, and even more so like that she told him the truth about how it happened, and because at that point it's like she even kind of mentions that she knew that he wasn't who he was presenting himself to be when they first met. So a part of me feels like everything she was doing was an act, and she just secured the bag, so to speak, throughout that whole experience, and putting him in a position where he had no choice but to get committed, like more fully than he, was up until the moment the plastic bag goes on that character's head that we just saw there in the trailer.
No, you bring up a really good point, because there is definitely a swerve this movie could have taken, a plot swerve, where she does end up being sort of the villain of the movie, where she is either lying about how abusive her husband was, and she ends up being, she is the one who does end up killing him.
Yeah.
Shooting him in the heart, exactly like Glenn Powell's character taught her to do, and he somehow doesn't clue into that fact. But this movie totally could have swerved into that, where I thought it was at certain points where she was going to be lying about everything and she was going to be using him essentially. And I mean, the case could be made that she was using him, but he also benefited from that sort of parasitic relationship where he got a girlfriend, he got
Yeah.
to have sex with her and stuff. And so
Got to role play her as an airline stewardess. And
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting theory and it's an interesting interpretation.
yeah. Because like when I first saw the trailer, that's what I thought was going to happen. And I thought that they were building up to the point where he was going to realize he was being played and there was going to be a way for him to escape accountability, but then have her take the fall for it all because she deserved to. And he was just only involved insofar as they were banging for a while before she killed her ex. But then they commit fully to that other direction, giving us the happy ending. So the rom-com happy ending. And I think that might have been because they genuinely felt it was more crowd pleasing to have the despicable characters get that versus because then they could have had a more 70s close, so to speak, where he has to reset himself after this experience and yet again try and figure out who he is. And I think that would have been more adult and mature of Linklater and Powell to do that. Especially since that's the scene that opens the movie is him outright asking his class, "Do you have a sense of self?" And and they could have if they had done a circle paradigm for the story here, that's where it would have gone. But they went conventional, and ultimately it didn't ruin the movie for me, but I felt like they had more juice in them to do something more.
Yeah, they could have zigged, but instead they zagged, basically. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, last thing that I sort of wanted to bring up here as we sort of come to a close, I guess, is we've been talking a lot about Glenn Powell, and he is sort of the up-and-coming guy, and there's a lot of theories that go around nowadays that, movie stars don't exist anymore. There's no such thing as movie stars. Tom Cruise is the last movie star, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know. How do you feel about Glenn Powell as our next movie star? Because when you look at this guy's track record and you look at his sort of upcoming films, he's going to be in Twisters later this summer. He also has like a prestige Monsanto movie coming out. Yeah. And then he's going to do the Running Man remake with Edgar Wright. So, I don't know. Do you feel as if this guy has the goods to be our next movie star?
I think he's perfect for the roles he's taking. Which, they don't really have anyone else they can plug in. Ryan Reynolds and Ryan Gosling aren't enough anymore. They're getting old. They're getting plastic surgery, and people can tell. They need and you need that immaculate, perfect, people's sexiest man, sort of Hollywood star. And if you're gonna make a Twisters movie, if you're like he already kind of the torch was passed in Top Gun Maverick. It seems like because it's not the other guy playing Goose's son whose name I can't think of. The
Miles Teller.
Miles Teller. It's not him, and it's not anyone else who like Alden Ehrenreich, who maybe had there was a moment where they thought he could have been that before Solo bombed so completely. And the roles he's taking, he's taking on the Bill Pullman role in Twisters. He's taking over for Schwarzenegger in The Running Man, and Edgar Wright is directing that, isn't he?
Yep.
Yeah, because for a while there, when Hollywood was elevating young male actors, they were kind of just girly men. They the guy in Tokyo Vice and the West Side Story remake. I can't think of his name either. I'm just horrible with names right now because that's how boring a lot of these people are. But this guy is genuinely creating a brand for himself. And he's in movies that people, I think, will actually want to see. whether it's just the casual audience or the art house crowd, which Hitman kind of inhabits, to a degree. And whatever this Monsanto movies like is, I haven't even heard of that. But the fact that we're getting a Top Gun 3 at all, I think is kind of nuts. But I guess it made enough money, but like I just don't like, if the magic is going to be there, it will be because this guy has established himself on his own, essentially just through sheer force of will. Like, he was in that Sydney Sweeney rom-com that was terrible, and it made back its budget and then some, from what I remember.
Yeah, that was for a rom-com, that movie was huge.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, and I think that's you have to be able to do it all, and he kind of seems like he can.
Yeah,
which is funny
certainly.
For someone who's been around as long as he has. He was in things I didn't even realize he was in, like Spy Kids 3.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, this most certainly, I mean, the other sort of weird thing about this movie, I guess it's not that weird because it's Netflix, but this is one of those films that they didn't even try to release in theaters because, I mean, they know that this has no like awards potential. I think it may have gotten a token release in LA and New York, but that's about it. And so this is one that you can just go watch now on Netflix, and it's definitely worth it. I mean, this is a crowd pleaser at the end of the day. I mean, it's rated R, so I guess maybe your kids shouldn't be watching it.
Yeah.
But it's something that I think a lot, it's for quadrant occupying, where this is something anyone could get something out of, I think. And so definitely a crowd pleaser, well worth watching.
It's a good date movie. It's sexy, and it's still kind of because it's such a hybrid genre wise. There's a lot of people that this can appeal to. Now it's time to move on to the mentionables. Matt, what do you have for us this week?
Yeah, so this sort of weekend and sort of into the beginning of next week, it's video game showcase season. And, we don't have E3 anymore, unfortunately, but this is sort of our replacement for that. And last night was Summer Games Fest, which is sort of Jeff Keighley's big showcase. And then in the next couple days, there's a showcase. I think Xbox is putting on one, and who else is? I think Ubisoft, and a bunch of smaller ones too, from a bunch of indie companies. But I will say I did watch the showcase last night, the Jeff Keighley one, and for my money, the thing that stood out to me was this sort of new Blumhouse games. Jason Blum is getting into the games business, and he showed sort of a montage of all the games they're making. And I don't know, a lot of these looked really cool in my opinion. They're all within the horror genre, of course, because it's Jason Blum, but the one that has me most excited is actually the one they didn't have any footage for at all. Brandon Cronenberg and Sam Barlow, who is sort of a up-and-coming game developer, are making a video game together.
Interesting.
And so I'm really excited to see where Brandon Cronenberg's his talents will kind of translate into the world of games. But yeah, this is always really a really fun week for me. I really enjoy watching these streams and getting everybody's commentary about, who had the best one and which ones sucked and which ones were good and, stuff like that. So fun stuff, in my opinion.
Right on. Yeah, like I think it's called the simulation. No, it's not called the simulation. I forget, because I noticed that when I was watching the clip that the Sam Barlow, Brandon Cronenberg, what's the title? Project C. The future was meant to be broken. All right, you got me, man. Because his visions of the future are delightfully fucked up, and because I know Blumhouse is a big name, but a lot of these games look like peak high quality indie fodder, basically. And like, there's even like a Stardew Valley clone in there that's about like grave robbing. I'm not quite sure, but I'm interested. And we'll have to see, because I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts about what Microsoft is doing to the video game industry. It almost seems like a controlled demolition of it, so they can just be like, oh no, nothing sells anymore. I guess we don't need to have an Xbox division, and they're just gonna let it all die or something absurd like that. But then, like, is Nintendo announcing the Switch 2 this summer, or is that coming in the fall?
Well, I think Switch 2 is probably going to be spring 2025 if I had to guess, but Nintendo, they're always really cagey about their, like, what do they call them? Nintendo Directs, I think. They always, for some reason, they announce them like 2 days before they happen. So Nintendo doesn't have anything showing up during this sort of week-long celebration, but who knows? I mean, on Monday, they're probably going to be like, Nintendo Direct is going to be on Wednesday or something like that.
Christ. My lamp just fucking fell on me.
Oh, jeez.
All right. This is a cursed stream today.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's there's still going to be some surprises, I think, but I don't think the Switch 2 is going to be one of them. They've said, I think, as much. I think they were going to try and release the Switch 2 around holiday 2024, but they delayed it to early next year.
gotcha. All right. Mine is a little more esoteric. Do you know who... Oh, yeah, there it is. Do you know who Nick Rekieta is?
No, I'm not. I mean, I looked into this because you put it as your mentionable, but no, I'm not familiar.
Okay, because he's from your neck of the woods. He lives in rural Spicer, Minnesota. He was a rural attorney that, got involved on YouTube, just kind of like decoding legalese for the layman about like a YouTube drama lawsuits, like the one between Maddox and Dick Masterson. And then he got involved in the Vic Mignaga, the Vegeta voice actor who was Me Too'd and tried to sue people for defamation. So like he was kind of like the video game lawyer guy as well, where he was like appealing to a niche audience, in this case, right-wing culture warriors. And then he split off into kind of just doing live streamed analysis about high-profile cases, and he really hit big during the Rittenhouse trial and during the Depp v. Heard trial. So much so that like he was getting millions upon millions of views on live streams that were up to like 10 hours long. So this guy was making a butt ton of money, and he was always, sipping on a scotch or like drinking a whiskey, and just being an edgy, like almost 40-year-old. Like, I'm not sure exactly on his age at this point, but he should not be behaving the way he's behaving, regardless. And I had tuned out on him a long time ago because I just kind of noticed this decline in the quality of his content. And then I should discover, another YouTube cohort called the Kino Casino, who just kind of they felt people, like they look at lol cows and they laugh at them, and Nick Rekieta had become one of their preeminent lol cows. And this guy has fallen from like being in a Netflix documentary about the Depp v. Heard trial because his streams were so significant to like, and what's playing right now is a critical moment. Right, the downfall of Nick Rekieta begins here when someone anonymously sends him like a ritualized Sonic Chew medallion and basically implies that he has now been possessed by the evil, spirit from another dimension that, befalls anybody. Like iDubbbz is another YouTuber who put on a Sonic Chew medallion when he should not have. These are dark artifacts. Chaos magic is definitely in play here. But this guy devolved into degeneracy, drug use, and alcoholism. And he was recently arrested along with his wife and live-in girlfriend, like, because they were like swinging and stuff. And he was cucking like the Steel Toe Morning Show, which is a Minnesota like internet radio show. Like the guy that does that, Aaron Imholt, was getting involved in that, and then he had gotten out when the drug use became too much, and then you find out, like, this is to our audience, this is why you should never have heroes. This is why you should never, like, put too much stock in internet grifters, and we promise never to become that, because we understand this is what happens when you are drunk on your own supply, so to speak. Because his kids were being deeply neglected. He had like 5 kids from like 6 to 16. And they were going to school wearing dirty clothes. They weren't getting fed because he was just too busy doing coke and Molly and God knows what else, and being drunk off his ass, and and fucking weird people in his bedroom, which the laundry room is attached to. So of course the kids can't do their own laundry, because they don't dare go into the room where all the shenanigans are happening. And the level of degeneracy was staggering. He was arrested with like 26 grams of cocaine in his home. And it's amazing how many people in the LawTube community, which he essentially created the genre for, are like going to bat for him and like blaming his own kids for getting the police involved when they very clearly were needed. And it's very, like, eye-opening for me, because I had been so tuned out on the dude for so long, and I just didn't realize he sucked this much. And and what was really funny though was that during his like not preliminary hearing, his initial appearance, his arraignment, it was live streamed. And of course, all court live streams have this do not record watermark on them. And the judge very loudly was like, I don't want this, being recorded by anybody. Like, you are violating the law if you do so. And every single fucking YouTuber who hated this guy was live streaming his arraignment. And I wonder if they're going to be, going after any of those people. But there were so many people trying to get into the Zoom call to watch the proceedings that they didn't turn the notifications off. There was just dinging after ding after ding from people requesting access. It was just nuts. And he's out on bail, and he put down the money for the bail himself, so he doesn't have to do any like drug testing, or he has like the cushiest, of all the like pre-trial release conditions possible. And he's representing himself as his own lawyer, which is, you just don't fucking do that.
Yeah,
but
so dumb.
But he's such a hot mess, and he's so arrogant, and he's fallen so deep into his pit that he's just digging to China. And we'll just have to follow this as it continues. But what's really ironic is that I'm using clips from Law and Crime. Please don't strike us. But they got into a big fight with him because he was just using their content to commentate over for hours at a time during these high profile cases. And now he is on Sidebar with Jesse Weber as one of the topics. And I think that their producers are probably just yes, we finally beat him. That's just kind of funny. But that's my mentionable. It's YouTube drama. It can be fun. It can be entertaining. But yeah, next week I'm going to be putting out a mini-sode digging into the Cassandras. I'm calling them the Cassandras of the streaming apocalypse, because Spielberg and Lucas called it, everybody, and the only clip available from it is in 480p from CNBC. So apologies in advance for how shitty it's going to look. But it's kind of jumping off of our news item from today. They had a lot of insight at the moment. They got a lot of their predictions right. And then we're going to be coming back around. If Minot gets Kinds of Kindness, that will be our next feature, review episode. And if it's not that, it'll be the Bike Riders. So maybe just go out and see both.
Yeah,
just in
most
case.
Certainly.
Yeah. But thank you for joining me, Matt. I apologize for my hardware failures, and all how choppy this is going to be. But I'll have fun with it and editing. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a good week.
See ya.